The war ended the way all great wars end in Westeros, not with relief, but with a strange, aching quiet. King's Landing burned. The Iron Throne became melted metal. The last dragon vanished into the sky with a body the world could not replace. And in the ruins, the survivors gathered to choose what came next. History will say the realm chose Bran Stark. It will say the kingdoms reorganized, that lines were redrawn, that a council raised a crippled boy into a broken crown. But if you want the real truth of what happened after the Great War, you don't start in King's Landing. You start in the North. Because 3 days after the Great Council, while the South was still arguing over law and legitimacy, Sansa Stark stood in Winterfell and took something Westeros rarely allows anyone to take without bloodshed: independence. There was no grand Southern ceremony, no cathedral bells, no polished speeches meant to sound noble, only a hall that still smelled of smoke and iron, and northern lords lifting swords as they shouted a title that had once belonged to legends: Queen in the North. And then, almost immediately, the cheering ended. The hall emptied, the noise disappeared, and what remained was not glory, it was responsibility. That first night, Sansa walked the castle like a stranger, not because she didn't know Winterfell, because she knew it too well. She saw what the wars had done: cracked stone where siege weapons had bitten, torn banners that used to hang with pride, the Godswood pool still half frozen, as if winter itself refused to let go. And beneath the castle, the crypts disturbed, coffins split, bones scattered, old kings and old daughters of Winterfell violated by an enemy that didn't even understand disrespect. The long night didn't just kill people, it broke meaning. It proved that tradition and pride and noble names don't matter when death itself decides to walk. The North had survived the apocalypse, but survival and recovery are not the same thing. Outside Winterfell's walls, the devastation stretched for miles. Villages abandoned, fields left unplanted because there weren't enough hands alive to work them, livestock slaughtered to feed armies that were now gone, roads unsafe, not because of war banners, but because hunger makes wolves out of men. And the North had lost something worse than soldiers. It had lost certainty. For years, the North had lived as if winter was a season. After the Great War, winter became a memory of bodies rising from the ground. It became the sound of ice cracking, the sight of familiar faces turning into enemies. Sansa had seen horror dressed as someone she once knew. That kind of memory doesn't fade. It hardens. Her first political challenge arrived faster than any coronation speech could prepare her for. Lord Glover, one of the men who had refused to fight for Jon at the Battle of the Bastards, stood in her hall as if he had always been loyal. He wasn't alone. Other minor lords who had stayed safe behind their walls during the worst years suddenly discovered an appetite for advice. They spoke about tradition, about proper rule, about what a young woman should or should not do with a crown on her head. Sansa listened. She wore the same calm expression she'd learned under Joffrey's cruelty, an expression that showed nothing while recording everything. When they finished, she dismissed the assembly with politeness that tasted like steel. Because here is what those lords didn't understand. Sansa Stark didn't become queen in the North because she wanted a pretty title. She became queen because she had learned exactly how ruthless the world could be and decided the North would not be prey again. That night she went to the maps, and maps don't care about pride, they care about math. How much grain remained? How many mouths needed feeding? How far supplies could travel before snow buried the roads? How long Winterfell's stores could last if the next winter turned cruel? The answer was simple. They could not last. The North was huge, but size meant nothing if you couldn't feed it. The granaries were thin. The coasts had been raided years ago and never fully recovered. The population was cut down again and again. Boltons, Lannisters, dead men, and the endless appetite of war. So Sansa did the only thing that works when swords are no longer the main weapon. She wrote letters. The first went south to King's Landing, but not to Bran, not directly, to Tyrion Lannister, her husband in name only, a man she'd been forced to marry, yet the only Lannister who had ever shown her something close to restraint. Tyrion understood survival. He understood bargaining, and he understood that rebuilding a kingdom isn't a heroic speech, it's logistics. Sansa's letter was careful. She asked for grain from the Reach, lumber from the Stormlands, medicine, and maesters, but she did not beg. She did not expose weakness, because desperation invites predators. Tyrion's reply arrived quickly, and between formal lines of diplomacy sat a quiet offer that never needed to be spelled out. Resources for information. He would help keep the North alive. She would tell him what was happening in the North, who grumbled, who might resist, who might someday become a problem. Neither of them put the real bargain in writing. Both of them knew it could destroy them if discovered. But that secret exchange, quiet, unglamorous, almost invisible, may have prevented Westeros from sliding straight into another war the moment the ashes cooled. That was Sansa's first real lesson as queen. Power is not always the crown. Sometimes it's the letter that never becomes public. Then the second crisis arrived on the first serious snow. Thousands of wildlings, free folk who had fled south during the long night, were now stranded in northern territory. They had fought beside Jon Snow. Many had died defending Winterfell, yet northern tradition had always called them raiders and thieves. Lord Manderly came to Winterfell personally with a petition signed by other lords. Send the wildlings back. They're eating food northerners need. They're occupying land belonging to old houses. Their presence insults every family who died protecting the wall. It was an argument the North had been trained to accept for generations. Sansa let him speak. Let the hall watch her. Let the tension build the way it always does in Winterfell when politics pretends to be morality. Then she stood, and she reminded them of a truth they didn't want to face. The wildlings didn't kneel, but they bled for the living. They held lines when they broke. They burned their dead so they wouldn't rise again. They fought creatures that made old feuds look childish, and the lands near Last Hearth were empty now. House Umber was destroyed. Those territories needed people who knew how to survive the harshest conditions. Who better than the free folk? The hall erupted in protest. Sansa didn't flinch. She waited until the noise died like a storm passing. Then she made her decision. Wildlings would be granted land in the gift and near Last Hearth. They would not kneel, because forcing them would start a new war, but they would defend those territories and pay taxes in what they could. Furs, game, labor, not northerners by blood, northerners by choice. Lord Glover walked out, others followed. The loss of support was real, but Sansa didn't chase them. A queen who chases approval becomes a hostage. That night, another warning came, this one from Maester Wolkan. The Vale was wavering. Robin Arryn had come of age, and the Vale's advisors were questioning why they should keep supporting northern independence. Trade, profit, security. The Southern Crown could offer all of that. The North, recovering from disaster, looked like an expensive ally. Sansa understood the danger instantly. If the Vale drifted south, the North would look isolated, vulnerable. And in Westeros, vulnerability is an invitation. So she did not offer romance. She did not offer herself. She offered economics, a trade partnership, exclusive rights, northern timber, furs, White Harbor shipping routes, exchanged for Vale grain and a formal guarantee of military support if the North was threatened. It was not a love story. It was a survival contract. And 3 weeks later, the Vale agreed. Not because they loved the North, because it made sense. Piece by piece, the rebuild began. Sansa expanded the glass gardens, techniques learned in the South, repurposed for northern winter. Food could grow year-round if you shielded it and controlled heat. She brought craftsmen from White Harbor and pushed repairs with practical engineering, not romantic nostalgia. She also built something the Old North rarely tolerated, a council. Quarterly meetings, lords and ladies given a voice, enough to feel included, not enough to control her. It wasn't weakness. It was a pressure valve, a way to prevent resentment from building into rebellion. And as Winterfell's stones were repaired, the marriage proposals arrived like ravens in a storm. Ambitious lords from across Westeros saw an opportunity. Marry the queen in the north, and you gain a kingdom without needing to conquer it. Sansa read each offer and refused every single one. Some were insulted. Some grew angry. Some tried again with sweeter words. She did not care. She had already been used as a prize. Twice, first as Tyrion's political marriage, then as Ramsay's nightmare. She would never again allow marriage to be something done to her. Still, Sansa wasn't naive. She understood stability. She understood succession. A kingdom needs continuity, and the North needed an heir. Eventually, she would choose someone, but on her terms. Not love, not fantasy, partnership. Someone who would not rule through her. Someone who understood she was queen first, always. The negotiations took time. Quiet time, unromantic time, and eventually she made a choice that was less like a wedding and more like laying a cornerstone. The ceremony was small, the marriage practical, and within years the succession was secure. While all of this happened, the letters to Tyrion continued. Sansa fed him truth, which lords were restless, which borders were tense, which regions could boil. Tyrion fed the north survival, grain shipments arriving when promised, warnings about southern schemes, information about threats Winterfell could not see from the snow. They never wrote down what they really were. Not friends, not lovers, not allies in public. They were two survivors, exchanging weapons that didn't clang, information and logistics, while everyone else pretended power still looked like swords. Years passed. Winterfell's walls became stronger than before. Storage expanded. The North's population slowly recovered. Villages were resettled. Wildlings in the Gift stopped being wildlings in the way old men whispered. They became neighbors. Some married into minor houses. Children grew up playing together. Free folk and northerners throwing snowballs as if the world had never ended. And one night, years after her coronation, Sansa stood at the window of her rebuilt castle and watched snow fall softly over a courtyard that finally sounded like life again. A servant brought correspondence, petitions, trade disputes, requests for favor, reports of problems that would never stop coming. That was the crown. Not glitter, work, endless work. But as she turned back to her desk, Sansa felt something rare, something she had never truly had in the South. Not perfect happiness, not a fairy tale peace, purpose. She was no longer the girl who dreamed of songs and knights. That girl had died in King's Landing long ago. The woman who remained was harder, sharper, built from lessons learned in cruelty and betrayal and survival. And she wore her crown the way the North needed it worn, not for admiration, for endurance. Ned Stark once said, "The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." Sansa finally understood. She did not survive by waiting for rescue. She survived by becoming the pack, by feeding the North, protecting it, integrating outsiders who had earned their place, and building structures strong enough to outlast her. The North would still face hunger. It would still face winter. It would still face future wars because Westeros never stays quiet forever. But Sansa made one thing clear in the years after the Great War. The North would never be helpless again. And that is how Sansa Stark, without dragons, without armies of conquest, without a throne of blades, quietly became one of the most effective rulers Westeros ever produced. Not by ruling through fear, but by rebuilding what fear tried to destroy. If you want the next chapter, we go north, past the Wall, where Jon Snow stopped obeying titles and finally chose freedom. Subscribe to Zaldrizes Iexio and tell me in the comments, was Sansa the real winner of the Game of Thrones or just the best survivor?